Welcome back to yet another exciting episode with Dr. Subhash Kak. Uh, Most of us know Dr. Kak, but for those who are unfamiliar, Dr. Kak, Subhash Kak, is a computer science professor at Oklahoma State University, Stillwater, in Oklahoma. He has written numerous books. He is a recipient of Padma Shri from the government of India. He is a member of Indian Prime Minister's Science and Technology Innovation Advisory Council. And his latest book, titled The Idea of India, Bharat as a Civilization. So we're going to touch upon some of the topics he presented in this. Welcome, Dr. Kak.
Thank you, Dr. Kurapati. Rajeev, really delighted to be a part of your show once again.
Yeah, once again, so excited. The last time was a super hit. Everybody liked it. And I got so many emails, WhatsApp messages, and a lot of great information in that. So this time I want to focus on something different from the last time. The idea of the idea of India. So let me start off with what you have written as the purpose of this book. I think for all of us, if you want to read any one book that gives a good representation of what India and what Bharat represent, I would strongly recommend this book. It's available online, any platform that you go, you can order. I downloaded a digital version of it. The Idea of India, Bharat as a Civilization. The purpose of this book, you say, is to present a truer idea of India that has emerged from the cumulative work of many scholars around the world. It addresses both the geographical India, connected now to the Indian state, the Rashtra we call, and the civilizational India that is to be found all over the world in the form of yoga, spiritual wisdom, Atman Vidya, and so on. And let me start off, Dr. Kak, with the quote you presented from Vishnu Purana. What is Bharat? What the geographical description of the Bharat? Uttaram yat samudrasya himadres chaiva dakshinam varsham tad bharatam nama bharati yatra santatihi. North of the great ocean and to the south of the Himalaya is the land of Bharatavarsha, where the descendants of Bharata live. So people talk about the ancient land of India as not a nation, but more like parts of the kingdom. Many scholars and authors talked about it. So Vishnu Purana, which I looked up on the internet, the dating of Vishnu Purana, it's very controversial. Anywhere from after Common Era to 700 or 800 before Common Era. So tell us about what we need to know about the geographical India. Then we'll go to the civilizational India.
Okay, very interesting question, because recently there have been debates in India that perhaps the idea of Bharat was maybe in the north, in the south, it wasn't really Bharat, which is of course contradicted by this Vishnu Puran statement. But I think more interestingly, which is something I didn't mention in the book, is that geographical India had a lot of influence on Southeast Asia, as we all know, Indonesia and Thailand and Indochina, and from there Philippines. They were all considered until very recently, until about 100 years ago, a part of Greater India. Now, just imagine, what is it that they call the direction west in Bahasa Indonesia, which is the national language of Indonesia? Geographical west, which is where, and which is really South India, from where, from Tamil and Telugu country, all these sailors went and had tremendous interaction with that region. The direction west in Bahasa Indonesia is called Bharat. Can you believe it? So all of West, which is all of India, which is Peninsular India, was called Bharat. So Bharat was really the self-confessed name of people who went from India to Indonesia. So really, I think not getting into the controversy as you mentioned about the dating of Vishnu Puran, I think indeed the entire region, which is the Indian state now, was called Bharat in the ancient times. And of course, there are many threads to that. The term Bharatas goes back to the Rig Veda. Then you have Bharata, who's the son of Shakuntala, right?
Yes.
And Dushyant in Abhijnana Shakuntalam, and then the younger brother of Rama, and so on. So the whole idea goes back, depending upon how you want to connect it, because India is such a rich tapestry of history and tapestry of stories. You can want to you can choose to connect to this or the other. But in reality, I think the most solid evidence is really from Indonesia, that they call all of India as Bharat. The entire western direction is called Bharat.
Yeah, you mentioned about the name of Agni, Rudra, one of the Adityas as Bharata, and Bha means light, and Rata means who are absorbed in it. The one who are absorbed in wisdom or knowledge are Bharata. So there are so many etymological derivations of the word Bharata, and then of course we got the name India. I don't know if people in the past referred to them as south of Bharata, west of Bharat, the kingdoms that, or they just went by the names of the kingdom because they took for granted, we don't have to, because we are civilized, culturally so united, because the Vedic wisdom was connecting all of them. So tell us about, you mentioned, I'm going to jump here a little bit, go to Zoroastrianism, Mithraism, and so on, where you can see some connection, although not exactly the same, but some connection to the Vedic terminology, Vedic cow worship and the metempsychosis, or, I don't know if they had the concept of Atma or things like that. So extending all the way from Indonesia, Sri Lanka, Nepal, from here, all the way into the Persian, kingdom.
Well, I personally think that the central idea of Bharata as people who are devoted to wisdom, Bha meaning wisdom, was really at the heart of it. But now, how do we see it through the lens of the many different layers of texts that we have from India? Because the earliest texts, the Vedas, are very ancient, even by the most conservative chronology. If you look at the Rig Veda, it's 4,000 years old. The Indian tradition says that it's at least 5,000 years old, because there are some individuals in the Mahabharata who also occur in the later books of the Rig Veda. So that seems to be a divide. That pre-Mahabharata period was that of the Vedas, the original Vedas, the Rig Veda. But now what's interesting is, from the question of geographical India, is that the earliest text, that is the Vedic Samhitas, mention primarily the Indian region, right? The 7 rivers, Sapta Sindhu, and so on. Another name for it is Sapta Sindhu. But later texts, such as Aitareya Brahmana, speaks of kingdoms beyond the Himalayas. And these are called the Uttar Kuru kingdoms, and Uttar Kuru and Uttar Madra. And so what this passage says, that the kings in Uttar Kuru also have Raja Abhishekam according to the Vedic rites. So which means that we have evidence that Indians had crossed beyond the Himalayas and established colonies. And there are Buddhist accounts and Tibetan accounts, well, for example, which say very clearly that with Ashoka, there was an Indian colony which was set up in Khotan. But later on, Central Asia, which is Xinjiang, was primarily Indic. They were Indic languages. And as you know, that became a great center for conversion of Indian wisdom into Chinese. It was a big translation factory for about 1,000 years until about 1200. And stream of scholars going and taking these texts and translating them. And those translations are still used. For example, the Lotus Sutra, it's still used in the same form as was done by Kumaraji about 300 CE. But now that's one side, and that is a bit later. But prior to that, you have Avesta, which is the beginning of the Zoroastrian tradition. And according to modern scholars, the Avesta, the earliest book in that tradition, goes back to maybe 800 or 1000 BCE. And it has language which is very similar to perhaps Atharva Veda language. In fact, you can take some of those hymns in Avesta and convert them into Sanskrit without making much changes. So it was really a larger Sanskrit region and beyond the Himalayas, because even though the Zoroastrians remember having also spent some time in what they call Hapta Hindu, which is Sapta Sindhu, but their center was beyond the Himalayas. So we do know this, and we know that the Vedic divinities are also a part of Zoroastrianism. In fact, Ahura Mazda is seen as Asura Medha, the Asura of wisdom. From Sanskrit, Asura Medha becomes Ahura Mazda. And you have Mitra, you have many other gods and goddesses in the Zoroastrian system, where we can go from Sanskrit to the corresponding terms. And for example, for Yajna that we have in the Vedic rites, they also have their rite, which they call Yasna. So the word Yajna became Yasna. And so a lot of their ritual is just like the Vedic ritual. Now, of course, it's also true that they made the Devas or the Daivas into bad characters, and the Asuras were the good ones. But we see that happening in Puranas also, where Indra falls off the throne. Indra is not praised any longer during the Puranic times, right? So I think that attests to a later time, and that does fit in with the larger chronology of the changes that were taking place in India itself. So we see two other threads here. One, the famous 10-king battle of the Rig Veda, Dashragnya battle. There were 5 nations fighting, and 2 of them were Anus and the Dhruyus. The other were the Purus and Yadavs and another one. So after the battle, the Anus and the Dhruyus, and we are told about this in the Puranas, leave India and go westwards. They say very explicitly, of the 5 original Vedic people, 2 people go towards the west, and we don't hear of them any longer. So this is evidence which connects us to the spread of the Vedic wisdom beyond the borders, because we already, about the East and Southeast, there is no doubt at all, or China and Japan, there is no doubt at all. The West also, there is a lot of interesting evidence, both from the Vedic texts and certainly from the Puranic texts about Anus and the Dhruyus going westwards and taking these divinities. We have these divinities also in Europe, and I do mention those in the book in a later chapter. But most interestingly, north of the Himalayas, because that's where there was direct contact, because there were Indian colonies in Xinjiang. If India's policy was similar to China's, where China claims any region as a part of China, if there was 500 years ago, there were 10 Chinese merchants living there who paid homage. They say, well, this belongs to us, like Arunachal or in Kashmir. So we could say that all of Xinjiang belongs to us, because it was actually Indian languages and Sanskrit and so on used as a powerful medium in Xinjiang until it fell to Islam in 1006. Now, west on the Eurasian steppe lands, the highlands, combining or joining from China to Europe, to East Europe, we find spread of Indian divinities. We have Maheshwara, to the west. In east, of course, there are lots of evidence, right, including China, but westwards in Samarkand, Bukhara, and then all over East Europe. The main divinity of the Slavic people was a god that they call Shvetovid, like the knower of Shveta or light in this context, who had four faces. Multiple faces is a hallmark of Indian imagination.
Mhm.
We have 4 or 5 faces of Shiva, for example, right? So this divinity, Shvetovid, has 4 faces. The north one is called Svarga. The
This
west
goes all the way to the Baltic.
Baltics. In fact, the main altar of Svetovid was in the Baltics, because the Baltics are also a Slavic language. Certainly Lithuanian is. So the northward face is Svarga, the westward face is Parjanya, the southern face is Lada, and eastward face is Moksha. This is the Slavic people.
Wow.
And then even if you go to the Celts, and the Celts are like the Irish, the original people of the Irish, who believe that they came from the East. Their divinities are also related to Vedic divinities. And so this is the north. And the south, there was always a connection through sea, because the gods in the north, like the Slavic gods in Slavic languages, are called Boga, like Bhaga. The god in Slavic languages is Bog. Bhaga in Sanskrit, right? But the gods in the Latin or Southern languages are called Deva, like Deva, Dev from light, right? That's why, so we have both ways. There is connection northwards, southwards. And we see evidence of that, and it's described in one of the chapters, that if you take primary abstract concepts like God, like sky, like king, and many others. And in Sanskrit, you have many, many terms for each of these, right? And you have corresponding terms at no single place in Europe, but in different places in Europe, right? And for example, God, I already said Bhaga and also Diva, right? Southern Europe. So other words as well, or land, or king, you see so much of variety of words, which tells you that these terms could not have come to India from any one place. But since all of them are contained in this treasure trove called Sanskrit, right? And they have gone one time or the other, just as we know what's the origin of potato. The origin of potato is Peru, because in Peru you find multiple species of potatoes. And when the Europeans came to Americas, they took some of those and brought them to to the old world, including India, right? And correspondingly, we have so many multiple words for abstract words, abstract concepts in Sanskrit, and we see them scattered at different places in Europe, which tells us that indeed our personal story, which we have in Puranas, and the story in the Vedas of people moving westwards and northwards and certainly eastwards at different points in time, is borne out by evidence that we have on the ground.
Yeah. So it's possible, like you said, the Sanskrit language, like we have Pali in Nepal, Pali language is a Prakrit of the Sanskrit. So it's possible that they might have developed their own Prakrit language and started branching off from there. So that's one thing. And second is, this is only circumstantial evidence. I don't have any archaeological evidence. Maybe there is archaeological evidence. Maybe they're excavating still. They're working. It's a work in progress. But it's this Asia Minor, they used to call, all the way from Turkey to Italy, all the way going back. You can see Pythagoras traveling into the eastern part, getting wisdom and returning back. And of course, settling in different parts from his homeland, because there were Persian invasions and so on and so forth. But he traveled all the way into the east of Asia, and maybe some parts into the Africa also, and then returning back. So you see, and when you look at Pythagorean lifestyle or history, as he gets older and more mature in his wisdom, he develops this vegetarianism, metempsychosis, treating everybody equal, even dogs and plants and trees as equal. So this is quite different from the Abrahamic beliefs and faiths, So this kind of homogeneity of outlook towards fellow human beings, towards cosmos, towards people, plants, and everything else was a consistent theme that you see across from China to this side and all the way into the Asia Minor. But when the Abrahamic religion, especially the Christianity, I don't know much about Judaism, but Christianity hit, and the Orthodox Christianity took over the reins of the faith, then things started changing, right?
Right. Right. The interaction of ancient India with the West again goes back very far. And you were right to mention Turkey or south of Turkey. There was a Vedic kingdom which ruled West Asia for 400 years. These were called the Mitannis, and they had Sanskrit names, Mitannis. They had Sanskrit names. And in fact, the very first monotheist in Egypt is considered the pharaoh Akhenaten. And Akhenaten's second wife was a Mitanni princess named Tadukipa. Kshipa means the night in Sanskrit also, because they worship Vedic gods, the Mitannis, and their language had...
Kshipa means what?
Kshipa means night.
Night.
Yeah, in Sanskrit, right? So the name of the princess was Tadukipa. Now, what happened was about 100 years ago, Akhenaten's tomb was excavated by English archaeologists, and they discovered in the tomb, which had not been disturbed, because many of the tombs in Egypt had been robbed across history, but this one was not. So they discovered amazing stuff. They also discovered a hymn to Aten, because what Akhenaten said, let's not worship the old Egyptian gods. From now on, we only worship Aten, which is the disk of the sun. Okay, so there's a hymn to Aten, which was discovered on the walls. And now they find that Old Testaments, Psalm number 106 is actually derived from Akhenaten's hymn. Now, many years ago, 20 odd years ago, I wrote a paper on this, and I showed how Akhenaten's hymn to Aten is very similar to two of the Surya Suktas of the Rig Veda. So a medium could have been, parts of the Vedic lore carried by the Mitannis, and that probably impacted the beginning of Judeo-Christian or Judaic religion. This is prior to the birth of the Jewish tradition, Akhenaten, because Moses, etc., come 200-300 years after Akhenaten. So in that sense, it appears that the Vedas have had an influence even on the beginnings of the Jewish religion. Now, as you know, the Jews worship Yahweh, and they're not supposed to take its name. It's the God whose name shall not be taken. But Yahweh is a term for Agni in Sanskrit, which occurs 21 times in the Rig Veda. Yahweh means one who should be praised. Havan, for example, it means worship, right? Yahweh means one who should be praised. So there are these connections which go back very far. And we also do know that the big symbol for Judaism is the Star of David, which is two triangles, and which is exactly like the Shiva Shakti yantra of Hinduism. The earliest record of the Star of David is in a Bible, Old Testament, from Russia, which is only 1,000 years old. So you have these tantalizing connections which have not been explored until now, because for 200 years, India was in a situation where people were not confident, excepting individuals like Tilak, etc. He wrote that book, famous book, on Orion, investigating all these thoughts. But now has come the time now that India is once again becoming powerful on the world stage. It's not that you've got to not speak the truth. What India really, Bharat means a people who are devoted to wisdom and truth. So whatever the truth is, and the truth ultimately really is that all human beings are the same, but what India has to offer is this idea of Atman, that every human being and every living being has the same Atman. This is revolutionary. No other civilization or culture had it in this sense. I mean, there was the idea of soul. That's not the same thing because souls are different in each individual. That's why if souls are different, the Abrahamic religions, they're compelled to adopt the idea that now they will be carried in their bodies to the heavens because, take their own soul and they will be resurrected. But the idea of Atman is that we are all the same. It's the same Atman in each one of us. Our minds are many, but Atman is one. And it's the multiplicity of minds which gives us grief and suffering. But if we can turn our gaze backwards to ourselves, to the Atman within us, Shivoham, find the Shiva within us, then all our grief will go away, which is what the Upanishads tell us.
So let me challenge you a little bit with this question here. So, what do you say to the Buddhists about was Buddha silent about Atman and everything else was an interpretation or expansion by the followers of Buddhists, that Buddha never talked about Atman really? He was silent about it. I don't know if he said there is no Atman. He just remained silent about it, I think. What is your research?
Absolutely right. That's what he would not answer this question. People would ask him questions because we have many sutras where his traveling and journeying and preaching is written about. But now there's one sutra which was very, very important for centuries. And right now, academic Buddhologists or Buddhists do not talk about it because it goes against their narrative. And this sutra is called the Mahaparinirvana Sutra. And in this sutra, on his deathbed, Buddha is dying, he's eaten bad meat the previous night, now he's fallen sick, as we know, and he tells his disciples, I'm going to be dying. And his disciples start streaming in, and one of them, his name is Chunda, he starts crying and weeping, and he says, who will look after us? Because you told us that there's nothing after life. Now that you're gone, what will happen to us? And then he hems and haws and finally tells them that, look, I did not answer the question of whether there is Atman or not all these years because you were too attached to this idea that you were not trying to, you were attached to the outer ideas. You were not trying to really go to the very heart of its meaning. But now that I'm dying, let me tell you that there is something which persists forever. And so on his deathbed, he accepted the idea of Atman. Now it goes counter to, but then of course, what happened was you had the great scholar and brilliant philosopher Nagarjuna from the Telugu country who said shunyata, everything is shunyata, and this became a very powerful force in Buddhism, even prior to the European encounter. But nevertheless, there were Buddhist scholars who were aware of Mahaparinirvana Sutra because this was one of the most sought after sutra in China, for example. It was translated into Chinese as well. And so the form that the Chinese tried to give was a kind of a Vedantic form to Buddhism that was carried to China. And in fact, that's the form that Kumarajiv, when he translated the sutras into Chinese, he also gave it a kind of a Vedantic twist. But in any event, because you can look at the idea of shunyata, which is nothingness, in two different ways. You can say that really it's not very different from the Upanishadic way where you say neti neti, that what is reality is not this, not this. but it doesn't mean emptiness. Shunyata need not mean emptiness. Shunyata is emptiness from the perspective of words, that no words can describe it. But it's not emptiness from the perspective of an element of reality. And therefore, what Nagarjuna was preaching was misinterpreted by Europeans, for example, European academics, and there are many European academics who have adopted Buddhism, but they are too attached. This is the kind of attachment that Buddha warned people against. Don't be attached to a mind idea, because these theories are all mind ideas. And the idea of Atman is this whole idea of transcending mind ideas, right? Because reality is beyond space and time, beyond the contents of mind, beyond nama and rupa. And so, to come back to your question, ultimately he did accept the notion of the Atman.
Yeah, this is fascinating because I see it just occurred to me that this idea of shunya was there at the time of Buddha. So so that's one thing. Second is, shunyata doesn't have to mean total empty. It's probably something beyond the concept of mind, like you said. So
Absolutely. I think that is the correct meaning. And the Upanishads also always speak about that the Atman is beyond the mind. And what the Atman does, it's like light, which illumines the mind. Without the Atman, there's nothing in the mind, because the individual is the experiencer. The individual is not the contents of the experience, because the contents of the experience are nama and rupa. They are names and forms. They are contents of the mind. So there are three stages to the mind, the Vedas tell us: the manomaya kosha, the Vijnanamaya kosha, and then the Anandamaya kosha. The Anandamaya kosha is the causal mind. That is the Karan mind, or Karan Sharir, so to speak. And that's where the samskaras which are inherent in us, or which we have inherited when we are born, they play their role in shaping who we are. But they are not the real us. The real us is the Atman. Whenever we see, it's the power of the Atman which provides the eyes the capacity to recognize things. Without this power, as I think Yajnavalkya says in his conversation in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, the eyes don't see, the ears don't hear, the skin doesn't touch. It's the Atman within who is doing this all, who is giving you the power to do this all.
Yeah. So this concept of mind, body, spirit that we see in the West these days, when I was studying some Sanskrit, and actually the actual Sanskrit text of Ayurveda, you come across one of the very introductory statements: Sharirendriya Sattva Atma Sanyogaha Dhari Jivitam. So they are defining what health is. Health is a proper harmony of Sharira, Indriya, Sattva, Atma, which is Sanyoga, means the proper harmony. So that is where you actually get the very first, according to me, is the very first definition of health is harmony of mind, body, and spirit. So, well, anyway, so my next point is, when you look at coming to medicine for a moment here, you look at Ayurveda and you look at traditional Chinese medicine, you see so many parallels. When I got some learning, some training in acupuncture. So when you're looking at acupuncture, they're talking about chi, or what we translate it as prana, right? So do you think some of course, Chinese would like to say we are the oldest, ours is the oldest, but there may be some connection between the Chinese medicine and the Ayurvedic medicine. Any insights into that?
There is. I don't discuss that in the book because that was not quite the focus of my book. But there is a lot of history. There are records of how, for example, during the time of Kanishka, Charaka, of the Charaka Samhita of the Ayurveda, the Charakas were very active, and how they took Ayurveda beyond the Himalayas, because Kanishka's empire also included Central Asia, and how Ayurveda also went through Tibetan medicine and went further eastwards. Ayurveda going beyond India's borders. Now, that's not to say that the Chinese, it may have been assimilated in some way, and the Chinese had their own terminology, etc. So you don't get the same terminology, but certainly in Tibetan, I think you do get the same terminology also.
EJ or beach. Then you also talk about temple. In the same chapter, you talk about temple as a representation of, which is a homology of human body, or homological representation of the human body, macrocosm to microcosm. And then there are different ways they constructed temples based on where you look at, from northern side of India to the southern side of India. Tell us something about what is the significance of temple to the actual science of it. We know the faith part, the cosmology of it.
Well, it's a very interesting story. Go back to the Vedic period, and in the Vedic period, they made these Vedis, and the fire ritual was performed on the Vedi, and there were different kinds. There was one which was the fireplace at home, which was a circular Vedi, and it was a symbol of earth. Earth was represented as a circle. Then there was the atmosphere, which was represented as a half circle. And the main Vedi, where the ritual was performed, was as a square, okay, in 5 layers. And how they were to be made, that's where geometry was born, because the geometry of that is in the Shulba Sutras. And one of the Shulba Sutras is by Baudhayana. And the Pythagoras theorem is already there many, many centuries before Pythagoras in Baudhayana Shulba Sutra, including the proof.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt you, but you see these shapes of these Vedis, Vedic, the actual where they perform the Havana, the offering. You see this eagle-shaped one, and there are some which are sun-shaped, and there are some, so many different shapes. Is that a representation of some kind of a cosmological phenomenon?
Right. Eagle represented time. So there was this called Shenachit. That was the grandest one. And it had to be made out of 1,000 bricks, 200 to each layer. In fact,
they have very specific number to the bricks to,
absolutely.
To each part.
Absolutely, 1,000. And I wrote a book on it in the 90s called The Astronomical Code of the Rig Veda that you might want to take a look at, where the whole theory behind it, there was an astronomy behind it. Because the whole idea was that the mind is governed by the earth. We are the earth. And Atman is the sun. So the ritual, the earliest Vedic ritual was to transform the circle into the square. That's where mathematics and geometry come in. We are transforming the manas, the mind, into the Atman. That's what the ritual was all about. The ritual was about a kind of a punarajanman of the Yajamana. Yajamana is sitting in front of the fire, and he's doing the ahuti, etc. So this was a kind of a rebirth. And rebirth is where he's now liberated from the karmic chain of his life until that moment. And that's when he has moksha. What is moksha? Because our minds are causal, they are mechanical, they are reacting. That's because we are physical systems. The Vedas admit that there are laws of nature, Rita, right? So we are also a part of nature. So there's no freedom. But the Atman is beyond space-time. That is what is free. The moment we, through either spontaneously or through effort, through either Jnana Yoga, which is effort, or Karma Yoga, or
Rajeev.
yeah.
Rajeev.
Raja Yoga or Bhakti Yoga or whatever.
Bhakti.
You
Oh
just
yeah,
let
Bhakti.
go, and then suddenly spontaneously. And at that moment, when you are one with Shiva, right, within you, suddenly you are beyond the confines of causality. That's what is moksha. Moksha is in this life. And that's when you get all those siddhis, you get capacities that you did not know that you possess. So this is really what the heart of the ritual. Now, coming back to the temple, so the original was to construct this grand 5-layered Shenachit, as an eagle, which is representative of time also, because there are two aspects to reality. One is consciousness, but what is consciousness? Consciousness is the capacity to each one of us to span across time. Because if there was no time, there wouldn't be any consciousness, right? That's why Shiva is also Mahakala, right? Because that is the god of time, so to speak. So time is the other mystery, and that's why the Shenachit was the shape of a eagle, and of course there were other forms also, even a turtle and so on, because that also moves like the earth. Earth is imagined on the back of a turtle, right? Kashyap. So what was done when the grand rite was done in a temple, for example, at the back, it was called Agni Chayan ritual. Then on the top layer, the fifth layer, in the middle brick, there was a hollow brick in which a murti, an image, a golden image of Purush, which is another form name for Atman, was placed within the hollow brick. That's like the Garbhagriha. So the idea of Garbhagriha goes back to the Vedas. Now, a lot of Indian scholars don't know it. Now, my book gives you all the citations and references. Not this book, the book Astronomical Code of the Rig Veda. And that is the original prototype of the temple, that Garbhagriha. Now, what was done eventually, initially it was just the 5 layers, that you created around the Garbhagriha a form of the cosmic Purusha, with his head and shoulders and the body, which is what the Vimana becomes, right? So ultimately, the whole temple was a representation of the cosmic Purush or the deity, whatever the deity is, because all these deities are complementary. Sat is Vishnu. Sat is all that there is. Reality is Vishnu. The mind, Chit within it is Shiva, because that's how we comprehend or apprehend reality, is through Chit. And our body itself is Prakriti. That is Ananda, because comprehending reality is what gives us pleasure and sukha, right? And that is what Ananda. So reality by nature has to be threefold: Sat, Chit, and Ananda, which means Vishnu, Shiva, and the Devi. They are complementary aspects of reality. It can't be less than that. That's why the Vedas are Vidya, triple knowledge.
That's amazing. See, when I don't know whether this is a product, I'm sure you will see some of this polemic debate going on between Advaita Vedanta and Dvaita Vedantins and things like that. But I ran into the Vallabhacharya's actual teachings, and he does, where Shankara talks about the Maya and the Brahman and the Maya, where, Vikshepa Shakti and Vikshepa, the the hiding and the projection. And I looked up I listened to one of the authentic teachings of Vallabhacharya. He too does mention something very similar. He calls it Avirbhava, which is revealing, and Tirobhava, which is concealing aspects of Brahman. So I have a feeling that there is a misunderstanding between how the teachers of so-called Dvaita Vedantins try to describe. I have a feeling that their version of bhakti as kindness, compassion, loving is a product of moksha, or is a product of liberation. Once a person who has true liberation, who has true salvation, will act will act more loving, more kind, more compassionate, and that they are calling bhakti. If that is towards God, towards Krishna, it may be called bhakti. Whereas when Shankaracharya is talking about bhakti as a means to attain moksha, which is concept chitta suddhi, bhakti as chitta suddhi, he's talking a different concept altogether. What Shankara is saying as bhakti to attain chitta suddhi, to attain moksha, whereas Vallabhacharya is talking about, well, you attain moksha and then you actually get into bhakti, which is loving.
Well, what happens is sometimes these disputes arise because we are talking in the world of the mind. Language operates in the world of the mind, mano maya kosha. And words can have different kinds of meanings, especially when we are using words to talk about layers which are beyond the mind itself. Then you can hold on to it in different ways. Now, for example, let's go back to Shankara's, let's say Advaita and Dvaita. Now, in the Dvaita systems, they would say that, look, the jiva will continue as separate from the Atman, right? Now, what they're trying to do, and from a certain perspective, that's okay. If you say that the Karan Sharir that you are born with, as an infant, the Karan Sharir that you bring is what came in from outside of your parents, right? Because your personality could be very different from that of either your mother or your father. And therefore, that Karan Sharir existed prior to you, and that is the jiva, and therefore the jiva is forever apart from the Atman, right? I mean, you can say that. But on the other hand, you could say that whatever the reasons for the jiva, but in reality, when you interact with the universe or interact with everybody else, it's the Atman who interacts through you. And therefore, jiva is only a vessel. So in other words, these are disputes at the level of the vyavaharik. They are not really disputes at the deeper level. Because at the deeper level, you can sort of see that they are complementary views of something which is beyond words. So I don't see any trouble there. For example, okay, I find Shankara's whole system very compelling, but as having being born in Kashmir, I'm also aware of Kashmir Shaivism, where we have not only the 25 tattvas of the Sankhya system, we have another 11 tattvas, where again, Shiva, there are 5 of them where Shiva is the Tirobhav, for example. There's also the hidden form of Shiva, which is Ishvara. In fact, that is standard Shaivism. Even Shaiva Darshan in South India is Shiva is hidden form, which is our normal sense of Shiva is the hidden form. Tat Purush within us, but we can't see him. Right, so that is certainly true, and Ishvara, and as Ishvara, that's how Ishvara is different from us, because the jiva doesn't have all that power that Ishvara possesses. Ishvara has all the powers there is, but since we don't know our real self, we don't know what our power is.
That is so beautifully put by you. As long as we are talking at the mind level, there is bound to have some kind of language, either you communicate or you miscommunicate, so that either of that will happen, in Panchadashi, which is one of the Advaita Vedanta texts, the Panchadashi Kara says, Chodyam va pariharo va kriyatam dvaita bhashaya. Advaita bhashaya chodyam nasti, na api taduttaram. Which means that all this happens in Dvaita level. When you go above that level, there is a question or an answer. It's you can see division.
Right, because then the division is in language, because language is all about the many, is about separation. And the moment we use language, each one of us has a unique mind history. So our really sense of what each word means goes back to our own past, and which is going to be different. And therefore, we are probably taking a different flavor from that that passage.
Yeah. Our language is influenced by our vasanas, our impressions of the mind.
Absolutely, our vasana, because our language and our actions and the contents of our mind are governed by the vasanas.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. And then you talk about we were still in that. I kind of took a detour and went all the way around and coming back to this geographical India. You talk about settlements, where there is a very structured from the smallest house with the many types of houses, grihas, and pura and grama and aranya. So when you look at some of the Eurocentric books, they talk about there is, everything is forest dwellers, people were just kind of wanderers many thousands of years ago. But then Rigveda, you mentioned very clearly in this book with a lot of references, with actually you quote the actual number in Rigveda, where they talk about many types of gruhas. I think you mentioned almost 8 or 9 types of gruhas.
Right. 8 or 10 types of grihas. So there were different kinds. There's complexity. One sense, as modern academic discourse tells us, complexity of language tells you something about complexity of society. And we find that complexity of language in the Rig Veda itself. So many different kinds of houses, so many different kinds of settlements. What does it tell us? That there was a corresponding complexity in the social organization. There were so many different professions. There are 20 or 30 professions. If you're just wandering families, then there will be only 2 or 3, right? You need somebody to maybe shave you or do this, wash clothes, but you won't have 20 or 30 or 40 different professions. So we see all that complexity. And we also see how, and this is what the Dharma Shastras tell us, that the Rajan, the king, or the prince, in order to prove that he's worthy of being a king, he must go to the Aranya and fight the wild forces, conquer them, and then he comes back. Because that process of going to the Aranya makes a boy into a man, makes for a real man. So you have to prove yourself. It's not that you were just living in a palace and then suddenly you became king. And that's why also when they were sent to the rishis, in the forest, the rishis in the forest, and the forest was never a very safe place. And these guys had to work; they had to protect as well. So I think that was a great thing. And there is a big modern lesson in that for 21st century America. In the 20th century in England, they would at least send young boys to boarding schools where life was rough in England, right? And then they would send them to India as officers, to rule over Indians. Now people live at their home. They are still soft in the US, 21st century. They're very wealthy. And so they're so confused. They've never really lived real life. So they're very confused. They say, well, we're not sure. I'm a boy or a girl or this or that, or morning I'm a boy, afternoon I'm a girl. So why is this confusion? Because there is a disconnection with real life. And the Vedas do insist that you must be connected to real life and also connected to nature. Yeah. And you have to experience real, even danger. That's what Aranya gives you.
Yeah. You touch on a sensitive topic, the gender identity, that that they are trying to pull their hair out in India. I don't know why there are 190 some odd countries, and of them only, I think about 23 or so passed the laws about that. And I don't know why they're so bent about that they have to get it done right now, that law has to be passed. But that's a different topic. But so when you mentioned about going out to the Aranya to defeat the enemies, it could also mean defeat the inner enemies, Shadripu.
Absolutely. I think that's a wonderful point. The whole central notion of Vedic or Sanatan wisdom is Samudra Manthan. Within each individual are the asuras and the devas. And education itself is samudra manthan. If education doesn't let you go through your personal samudra manthan, you will never attain to what you are capable of being, right? And so going to the Gurukulam was also an inner samudra manthan. And I think these are ideas which are still relevant. In fact, we just talked about contemporary US. That's what education is lacking. And that's what needs to be done somehow. If this onslaught of AI, all the challenges, jobs going away, societies will have to repurpose themselves. I think these ideas will have to be introduced into societies everywhere. Education should do churning both inwards and outwards. And if you're only being given information which you have to memorize, then you'll never grow up.
Correct. That is how, in my field of medicine, everything was on memorization, objectivity, quantification, definitions, and things like that. And we lost that bedside manner, that human connection, that communication skills, understanding persons, fears, anguish, preferences, and things like that. So with this technology boom going on, the medical schools, especially in US, are starting to bring back that kind of human connection back into it. So I think as we do that, this how to control your kama, krodha, lobha, moha, mada, mascharya. How do you do that? That is not in textbooks. That you have to live through it. You have to face an enemy and then see how you react to it. So that has to come. In the past, they used to do with the guru and gurukula system and so on and so forth. Like you said, I hope that comes back, not just in the West, but also back in India too. They also, because most of our education in India is a reflection of the European education system or Western education system. But I hope that comes back. So moving on, I think we're getting close to the end of it. I see when I read through your book, I see you used both archaeological evidence and also circumstantial evidence. In relation to this happened, and so it cannot be. It has to be much older than this. So like that. So is that how you approach this topic? You use both archaeological evidence or more circumstantial than archaeological, because the archaeological evidence is only is new and it's in its infancy, I guess.
Well, that's what you have to do. The scientific method, you also have to infer. You have to look at different kinds of evidence, but the evidence should be cross checks. If there are no cross checks, you can then lose connection with reality. So here, what we have from ancient India, but that's only one side to it. How ancient India is, that's only one side of the story. Even if India, they're not that ancient, what we are talking about is, what is the idea? The idea being this land of wisdom, which it truly is. As I was growing up in small villages, and these villagers used to drop in at my parents' home, and they would talk about, there was this thirst for knowledge even then. Or during summers, sadhus will come from all over North India to Kashmir, and they would drop in at our home, and they would talk to my father or my mother. So I think it's this thirst, this striving to find answers to the deep questions, which has been a part of the Indian experience, and which is what I have also tried to then validate further by looking at the hard sciences itself. The later chapters tell you about the history of the hard sciences in India, and that is a remarkable story as well. Extremely remarkable. People don't quite know that modern science sits on the shoulder of Indian sciences. We have not been told this, and what I'm telling you is not a fringe opinion. I'm telling you this is the standard view of historians of science. We have such an amazing story, and it's coming back now because India is already the world's third largest economy in terms of purchasing power parity, and it's expected to become second in 10 years and first maybe in 20 years. So Indians will then, these stories will go out much more readily. In the past, they used to be resistance to these stories, because people would say, hey, India can't even feed itself. What are these big stories that people are talking about? But that's not going to be their story anymore.
Yeah, yes. Once we get the economic freedom or economic stability, or I wouldn't say stability, economic freedom on par with the rest of the world, I think we will have a lot more intellectual visibility, and as we develop our own New York Times and the Washington Post, our own way of doing things, I think people should look up to us, like how they used to look up to Nalandas and Takshashilas and things like that. So I think
those which were the world's first universities, and Nalanda was destroyed only about 1200 or 1300. People from all over Asia used to come there, and that was most of the world's economy until recent times was Asia. India was 45%, China was 35-40%. That's already, but 80% of the world economy was Asia. That's where most of the population was too. And as the center shifts much more readily, in any event, India's hold on the world imagination would not be centered to India just because we are Indians, because really what defines India is this sense of wisdom. It's the idea of Atman. Anybody who embraces this idea of Atman, now you might say, but isn't this a very exaggerated idea for which there's no proof? Well, there is indirect proof, firstly in people's personal accounts, stories of people like Srinivasa Ramanujan, talking about how they got their equations in sleep, which is when Tejas operates. Normal consciousness is Vaishvanar, right?
Mm-hmm.
In dream, it is Tejas, and then in deep sleep, in Sushupti, it is Ishvara, right? That's when Ishvara is. So Tejas, when Tejas operates, that's when you get access to wisdom, and that's one story. But this is a story all around the world. When it comes to creativity, people get access to something beyond the box, out of nowhere. That's when, through daydreaming, they have been connected to the Tejas within them, which gets them closer to Ishvara. That's Ishvara speaking through us.
Yeah.
That's how the world works.
Yeah, you use that example, and in our literature, you can see Parapashyanti Madhyama Vaikari. When you look at the para level, that's how the wisdom flow. So they have described it in so many different ways. So that is the best part. If you don't like it, you there is another way of explaining to you. There is a different way of.
No. If you don't like it, if you are the Western way, you don't say Atman, perfectly fine. You are living in the Sharira expression of the Brahman, and that's fine. You can live in that, but there is also more suffering. There is suffering, and there is losing the way, like what seems to be happening. So since we are not talking about anything Indian, what we are talking about is what is universal, Sanatan, what is Shashvat, what is eternal knowledge which belongs to the whole universe. So you can live in the material alone and fine if you can manage it, but if you can't manage it, at some point, in order to really know what the mystery is, you have to delve deeper into yourself and get connected to the Atman. So that is what Sanatan is all about. And I think that is the heart of India. That is the heart of the idea of India.
Yeah, that is so beautifully said. So for our viewers, we only touched on one chapter, and that too just kind of breezed over headings in this 1 hour. So there is a lot more to this book. Strongly recommend you get a hold of this book and start reading. You can read it, reread it, share it, learn from it, do a PowerPoint. So there's so many ways you can learn from it. So I strongly recommend. I'll leave a link in the description below. So we have so many other things we can talk about. Maybe in another conversation, we'll touch upon some of those concepts. Thank you so much, Dr. Kak, for having this conversation with me. Look forward to another one sometime soon.
Thank you, Rajeev. Thank you very much.